Everyone, these are our grad students. They're making up our grad panel. I think they're going to start with like a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll dive into questions. Any questions you guys have. This is going to be slightly less formal than the like previous panels we've had, so just like put your hand up and or like just go ahead and like ask the questions that you have. Okay. So yeah, we're going to start with introduction.
Yeah, I can get us going. So my name's Max Kaisler. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a 6th year in the complex PhD program. Niklaus is one of my dissertation advisors. Just a plug for Niklaus. And my English is my major literature. I also work with Latin, ancient Greek, German. I have a DE in film studies, and I am in the process of writing my dissertation, putting the perspectives together.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Yana Zlochistaya. My pronouns are also she, her, hers, and I'm in my 3rd year, which means that I'm sort of at the very, very tail end of finishing up my coursework, teaching with Max. Yeah, preparing for my qualifying exams, which are at the end of next year.
Hi, I'm Gladys. I'm a 4th year in this department. What are you saying? So my major literatures are Russian and Latin American lit. I just got into the new media E. I'm running the working group next year as well. I'm stressed, so I'm forgetting everything. What am I doing?
Oh, we talked together.
We talked together. Yana and I kind of talked together. We have GSI for this in class. Yeah. I was supposed to do calls this semester, but I just stopped reading. I don't know. Anyone experience that? So it's pushed till December. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. I'm not teaching. I'm on fellowship, so I'm kind of just vibing.
Love to hear it, honestly.
Yeah. My major languages are Russian and English.
So, okay. I guess I'll just start with the basic question. What was it, or like when was the moment that you just decided you're like, academia, here it comes. This is what I want. Oh no, that's my bad.
No, that's well, I can get us. I mean, for me, I was the sort of kid very early on in my life that was always looking forward to school starting in September. Mm-hmm. So I guess there wasn't a lot of my life has always orbited according to the academic calendar, right? So and I've always loved that. I've never wanted to give up summers. So from an early age, I figured I wanted to do something with teaching, but I didn't know anything about academia. No one in my family that I was close to had gone to any grad programs or anything like that. And I also wasn't planning on college necessarily when I was in high school. But then lo and behold, here I am now. It was really due to the mentorship of different individuals in high school and college, just sort of random conversations that you'd have in office hours or stopping by someone's office or running into a quadrangle or something like that. And those were really decisive in terms of like the course of my life, in terms of arriving here today. Yeah, so in a nutshell.
I would say, so I was a junior transfer to Berkeley. And my experience as a transfer was sort of like, the pretentious way that I wrote it in my grad school application was it felt like being told to tour the entire Louvre in an hour. Like you were just sort of like racing from thing to thing, being like, I'm missing everything. And so I think when I left, I was like, oh, I'm not done with this. Like there's still, like all undergrad has taught me is how little I know. Not all, but like the primary thing. And so I think I worked between undergrad and grad school. Highly recommend. Highly recommend. But I think like through those experiences, while I enjoyed those jobs and enjoyed that period of my life, I think I had a sense of like I want that very specific thing that school provides, the structure of like reading things, being told what to read to a certain extent can be kind of nice. Yeah, but that's not to say that like academia is where I want to end up. It's just like where I'm vibing now.
Where you at?
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
Sure. Yeah. Me. So academia, here we go, hasn't happened yet. And that's, but I am here. So how did I get here? Kind of on accident. After college, I moved to Central Asia. Like 2 weeks before I was told I was going to move to Central Asia for a year, just to study Russian, continue to study Russian. And then I worked as a project manager for a software company. That was my first job out of college. And I had a meltdown, and I showed up in my pajamas to the front desk. I was like, I'd like to quit. And so then I went back home and was like, wow, what am I doing? I worked at Target for a while. Terrible employee, but great discounts. And I hit up my high school teacher and was like, please just give me a reason to wake up every day. So I started tutoring. I started tutoring math. And I sat by this tree that I named Frank. And for 3 months, was like, what am I going to do? And I realized, it sounds like I'm an academic. My resume reads like I'm an academic. That's what I've been preparing for. So I applied to a master's program to put my foot in the water and see if I liked it. And I did a master's in Spanish in Madrid, in Middlebury. And I loved it. And I was like, yeah, grad school's for me. It's totally different, right? Being in Madrid, doing a master's is a really different experience than coming back to a large public research university, and each has its advantages. But yeah, I didn't have anyone in my life that had ever gone to grad school, so I didn't know what it was going to be like. And I'm not sure if I still know what this trajectory is actually like.
I really resonate with what you said about the mentorship and the conversations that you had that sort of decided your path without even kind of knowing it. Because I actually came into Berkeley as a biology major. So I came in doing MCB, and literally my first semester I took a conflict class and switched almost immediately.
Who was teaching that class?
It was Marianne. I don't know her last name.
Yes.
Oh yes, she's amazing. So her, and then the next semester I took a class with Mary Mussman, and immediately switched. On the day of the deadline to add or drop classes, I dropped all my STEM classes and added a bunch of humanities classes. And I feel like that's what's really important.
I just we love a convert.
Me too.
You're kind of but yeah, and it was really those conversations in office hours with professors. Yeah, that idea of mentorship is so important. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on how that has helped you, or how what the significance of that has been for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for instance, it's wild when you kind of look back now and you're like, whoa, if that conversation hadn't happened, right, I wouldn't have done this or this or this. So honestly, so before I came here, I had a MFA in poetry at the University of Montana in Missoula. What made me decide to do that is I graduated from college at Amherst College in Western Massachusetts. I was just living and working 6 jobs, and one of those jobs was at a bakery, and there was different people who worked at the college. Amherst College would come to the bakery, and there was one who works on fellowships, graduate fellowships there. And she saw me and she's like, oh, I remember you. How have you been doing? And we're chatting. And she's like, so what about graduate school? And I was like, what is it? I don't know. And she picked up her cake and left. But then I saw her a week later, and she's like, you should really apply for one of these things. And so for me, always finances have been sort of, as they are for most people, the determining factor in my life. So for me, it was okay, can I get funding, or can I get paid to teach at a school? And so sure enough, I found MFA programs that were fully funded, and in poetry, which I do sometimes. And so that was one conversation in the bakery that steered my life that way. Then when I was in Montana, actually it was another bakery experience, but I was not working at the bakery, but I was sitting outside on a bench, and I ran into my English professor on campus, and he was like, do you ever think about comparative literature when you're done with your MFA? And I was like, what's that? I've never heard of that before. He had gotten his comp lit at Cornell years ago, and so he was just telling me about it, sort of just planted that seed, and then a few weeks later, that grew. I talked to some other people, and so just those sort of tiny suggestions even from different people. And I know different mentors have different strategies. Some people are very hands-on, but for me, it's just been these little sort of adjustments that have helped me navigate. Yeah.
Very cool. And then Yana, I'm so interested in so you strongly recommend working between undergraduate and graduate school, right? So what do you think that gave you that you wouldn't have gotten if you'd gotten from undergrad to graduate school? directly, you know?
So I should say, like, the caveat that, like, I know that that's not possible for everyone if you're here on a student visa, as a couple of my friends are, like, you don't have the choice, you don't have the
I'm on a
luxury.
student visa.
Yeah,
Really?
exactly, yeah. So like, I completely acknowledge. However, if you have the chance, if you have the opportunity, I think that we have all been, those of us who are in undergrad right now and didn't take any gap years, have been in like the education system since we were 5 years old, more or less, right? And like stepping back and sort of discovering what it's like to be an adult, and that isn't in sort of like a structured setting, I think was hugely, like, the first 6 months after graduation were really painful, but then the next year and a half were like wonderful. And also, I think the other thing is, as I'm sure those of you guys in undergrad know, it is work-life balance is so hard. It's so hard to, like, when you're a student, it's just like it's not conducive to it. And I think even having a model of what a life could look like that had work-life balance, like what it looked like to leave work at home, was not a thing that would have been possible for me to even like conceive, had I gone straight to grad school. Because grad school is also not super conducive naturally to work-life balance, and so you really have to like work really hard to set those boundaries. For me, with mixed success, but at least I know like what I'm aspiring to because I've had that experience. You know, I've had the experience of like coming home from work at 6 and then just like not thinking about it and just like living a life, like wild things. So yeah, that's my primary thing. My primary reason.
Well, I will say, alternatively, my job sucked. So I also remember that when I'm here. So I'm like, outside also can suck.
Yeah. It, like one way or the other. It provides experience, right? And it gives you a reason, like what to do with it.
Like, as you mentioned that like it was so completely different to come to grad school. I'm like, I was wondering, like, what did you find? Like, was like what didn't change? You know, what was just like the same, and you were like, wow, okay, I'm still dealing with this. And like, what was it that you were like, oh, what is this? You know, like, what were the two?
Like from being like working other jobs versus coming to graduate school.
Yeah, or even your difference from like masters to.
Oh, I mean, with the masters, it's like the classes were 3 people. So it also probably just depends on the program, the size of the program that you enter. And also it was in Spanish and it was like a different culture. So that changed as well. And I think what's true about this department, I don't know about the undergrad level. I actually made no friends at the undergrad level. I don't know how you guys feel as a community. But like there's a lot of freedom in this department, but it also means there's like very little structure. And so you kind of have to decide what works for you, right? In my master's, there was a ton of structure. I knew exactly which classes I had to take. I knew all of the professors here. Like I can see the professors in conflict. I'm like, when's the last time I saw you? I have no idea. Like, because we don't work together. Like maybe that's just not someone that's in my field. So, I mean, if you're thinking about programs, definitely think about like what kind of community are you searching for? Do you prefer the freedom of just being able to like move any way you want to, or do you want the like structure of someone telling you this is exactly what you have to do, and your cohort's going through the exact same thing as you're going through, so you have that support as well.
Yeah, actually, so just to go back to what Yana said about like the 6 months after graduation are just difficult. Who here is a senior who's graduating soon? Okay, great. So we're looking forward to that. But yeah, that's so interesting. Like we talk about like it is a really sort of like open field, and like it does have boundaries, but those boundaries are so much like so permeable. You know, you can sort of like drift in and out of things, and like. Yeah, I guess it is like about your individual preference, right? But you found that like sort of like after the undergraduate experience, it was like more focused, and you didn't have as much like sort of ability to like dip your toe into like other things.
No, I think I'm dipping my toe everywhere,
like
constantly. I've been able to take classes in like anthropology, new media, performance, Slavic, Italian, Spanish, like. You can kind of just go everywhere, right? Until someone yells at you, and they rarely do. So, I've had a ton of freedom, and I think now I look back on it, I'm like, maybe I should have applied to a performance studies department, but I had no idea that was even an option. And this department has like given me exposure and allowed me to pursue those interests to even realize that I had them in the first place.
Well, but something else I'm like hearing that's like similar throughout the things is just like the like. The way that it's sort of just kind of I completely lost my train of thought. Never mind. Sorry, guys. We're gonna move on rapidly. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, go for it.
I have two questions. I can ask the second one after other people go or whatever. But beyond just like Googling like PhD programs that offer full funding, 'cause I'm a junior and I'm hoping to apply my senior year. Like, how else would you kind of know or find those programs? I do that.
I would say that, and I cannot emphasize this enough, it's so, like, the program is so secondary to, like, the people, like, the professors that you actually want to work with. So if you have a vague idea of what you want to study, my idea was incredibly vague when I was an undergrad, but, like, if you sort of know, you know, even the languages or whatever, and you come across scholars who you like, whose work you enjoy, like, sort of work backwards from that. Where do they teach, and what's the program like there? And also, grad students, in my experience, are honest to a fault. So then maybe talk to people who have worked with said person and get a real sense of what they're like as an advisor, because I've found that it's much more like the prestige of the professor that I work for matters so much less than like if we get along and if like their advising style sort of works with what I like and what I resonate with. So I would say, yeah, working back from that. Also, where do you want to live? Yeah. Also that.
That's really fantastic advice, because I was going to say, yes, the geographical location, but also it really is kind of a research process in terms of, you know, looking up all the faculty members, looking at their works, checking out those works, reading them, seeing if you like their style, seeing who else they've worked with. You know, I'm not adding anything new that Yana hasn't said in that respect, but I guess that's something I didn't know when, say, I was applying for colleges, right? But that's something for grad school that I highly recommend. And that, you know, being said, I think in my statement for the application here, you know, I might have pitched working with 3 people that I've never worked with here. So in my mind, like, oh, these will be fantastic, ideal people. And then I was like, well, not so much. But there are these other fantastic people. So it wasn't like, I mean, that's kind of what's so nice about the capaciousness of literature is that you can find your people. Yeah.
I have no insight. I applied to the top 10 programs. I was like, my parents don't know anything about this field. I cannot sell them on something that isn't prestigious and isn't going to sound to them like I'm going to find a job afterwards. And if my dad said no, it was going to be no. So, yeah. It's also important. Like, are they going to get you hired? It's like, if that's what you want to do, that's important to know.
And I think that is like, I feel like that's like really like relatable to a lot of people here as well. Like, I know my parents are the same way, you know? So I remembered my train of thought from earlier, which was that there's this like thread, I feel like this common thread of like these like random discoveries almost, or like exposure, like, oh, this department, or oh, this field, or oh, this topic, or professor. And that's like so interesting that like these little experiences sort of can transform like a whole career, or, you know, yeah, which is, that's really cool. Yeah, any other questions from here? Yes.
Yes, going along with that comment about prestigious institutes, I was recently just admitted to like my dream MA program, and I'm so excited, but also terrified at the same time. So like, how did you get over that? Because like UC Berkeley is a huge name, and like knowing that you're going to represent it, knowing that you're going to be working there, you're going to be studying there. How did you manage like your nerves and your pressure and feeling maybe like imposter syndrome, which I think we can all relate to.
Oh, can I start?
Yeah.
I have one thing that I tell myself a lot, which is like, I may be the dumbest person that they've ever accepted, but I'm here. And they're there. That seems like a dumb problem at this point, right? So like, yeah, just accept worst case scenario, except worst case scenario isn't actually that bad.
Yeah.
If I was the worst person I ever accepted, I'm still here and I still get the check, you know?
Yeah. I have nothing to add.
So my other advice on this topic to young people going to fancy institutions where they're, you know, worried and they have the imposter syndrome going on is you're going to sit around a table, and if you conflate all of those people around the table and you turn them into one brilliant person who knows everything about everything, yes, you're going to feel stupid the whole time. But if you actually, in the early weeks that you're there, you really pay attention to the individuals around the table, you realize, yes, she knows everything there is to know about modernist pattern poetry. And yes, she's an extraordinary Russian scholar. And yes, she's lived in Asia and done XYZ. But they're not all one person. They're individuals. You are just as impressive as an individual as each one of those people at the table. And collectively, yes, you're extraordinary. And the knowledge at this table is extraordinary. But really, they're not all that knowledge is not bound up in one head. They're all, it's collective, right? Does that help?
Yeah, that's
To me, prestige means nothing. Also, in terms of, or I also just not having an academic family didn't know that UC Berkeley was prestigious in any way. I also had gone to small liberal arts college, so I basically was living underground and not really seeing many people. So I've never really put value with the prestige because I think it can overrate certain things about like working with particular individuals who might be really wonderful. And also, I'm not a big fan necessarily of the egos that sometimes come along with that. So I think just knowing that you yourself are grounded enough to feel like some humility is like, wow, I guess I'm like a real human that like has insecurities. And I think just keep that going, you know, you're great. And they deserve, well, they will deserve to have you there eventually.
I will also, I didn't think of one more thing, which is that it is very true that depending on where you go to undergrad, you come into graduate programs with different levels of experience, specifically in the sense that, in my experience, Gladys, I don't know if you also would agree with this, you went to UCLA for undergrad, right? Public schools tend not to give you as strong of a grounding in critical theory as smaller institutions. So I came in here not knowing who like Frederick Jameson was, whereas like I had a classmate who could have probably written a dissertation in their first year about Frederick Jameson. And I felt profoundly dumb. Very similar. Like I independently came to the conclusion that I was the stupidest person that Berkeley had ever accepted. So yeah, that's why we're friends. And I think the thing that like it took me a while to know is it wasn't that they're like they were intellectually superior to me inherently. They had taken like very specific classes that I hadn't taken, and I was a transfer, so I was only, I did a lot of my like survey courses for community college, so like I got a very different background, but I also got to like hang out with people who were between the ages of 18 and 22, which was very good for my brain and heart. So I think just like sort of keeping that in mind, that your background isn't a reflection of your intellect or your potential, and you don't need to be an expert in everything. You need to find the thing that you like and get good at it, and then sort of finagle your way through the rest. Yeah.
But also, like, it's not easy. I spoke once my first semester, but the class we were required to take, Compo 200, I spoke once. And she gave me a B. And I was like, this is failing, right? Like, this, I'm not supposed to be here. And so I emailed to quit. I sent her an email, and I immediately got a response that says, I'm out of office until January 6th. I thought, at that point, I will have quit. I was so embarrassed that I sent this email. But yeah, I didn't quit, and I saw her the next month, and she's like, no, you're fine. You're fine. Like, it's totally fine. I was like, no, but I got a B. That's failure. And I still tell that story because I don't think a lot of people talk about that, and I don't think many people actually look at me. But I did, so you know someone. Yeah, it's hard. It's not going to come easy. It's not going to come immediately.
And I'm glad we're talking about these things. Like, for one thing, the financial sort of question that like everyone has on their minds, and like it's not easy. And I think that that's like an important thing to just like address right off the bat. Go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah. What do you think your most memorable moment, positive, of your PhD experience or graduate school experience was, and one of your most memorable moment, not positive, negative, was?
Okay. You can take time, everybody.
Close your eyes. Close your eyes. You can reflect.
Going through the very long.
That's like a carousel that never ends.
Doesn't need to be the most. It could be a.
No, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm not really thinking. I'm just like paralyzed.
Okay. I can start with the least positive, just because that's the one that has been on my mind lately. Which is, oh God, hi Niklaus. I'm very seriously considering not continuing. And I'm figuring that out, and it's sort of a painful thing to think about because there are so many things about graduate school that I love. but also there are so many things that are hard. I really struggle without structure, and there are people who do great working independently and without structure. And I'm not one of those people. I've got lots of other great traits. I'm a good teacher, and I I'm a good public. Like I know the things that I do well, and not all of them are sort of in line with the structure that graduate school provides. So it's been a very painful thing because I figuring out if I want to continue or not. So that's been the least positive. Yeah, I would say most positive for me, this isn't really like a moment, but it's definitely been the people that I've met, like specifically the fellow grad students. Some of the best people I've ever met, some of my closest friends have come out of this program. And whether or not I choose to continue, like those friendships and those people are going to continue to be there. And I'm incredibly grateful. And honestly, some of the professors too, that's the thing. I do feel like now that I have had the experience of being in grad school, it feels less impenetrable than it did before. So I know even if I do quit, but let's say I want to work on a translation project, I have people that I can email and be like, hey, this is what I want to do. Can you help me with that? And I know in 2 or 3 cases that they would definitely say yes. So yeah, that would be that for me.
Yeah, just to echo that, I mean, just in terms of really extraordinary individuals that you get to hang out with, and so my fondest memories are working with Lynn Kajinian, a poet in the English department, and her allegory and everyday class is really fabulous. And since then, I'm in a reading group, reading ancient Greek tragedies with her every week, and it's been really wonderful. Or Ian Duncan, also in the English department, he usually takes his classes out for some sort of drinks or dinner at the end of the semester, and it's just the most lovely convivial atmosphere you can imagine. And always just a pleasant see Klaus in the hallways. I mean, just if you're feeling down, it's just an immediate buoying upwards. Same with Tony. So I think just finding people who are really kind. It's really, it's hard to do sometimes to find kind people. So I'm really lucky for that. I guess the most difficult part has been financially here. So that would be just the cost of living. I was never in debt in my life before. Now I'm in debt. Had to take out loans to stay here. So don't recommend that. Don't do that. Don't make my mistake. But it's sort of a balancing act. Yeah, for sure.
Mine are both with students. I got a really bad evaluation. My one bad evaluation. I know, but I remember it. It's the only one that I remember. And it's just you're still students there and you're still doing evaluations and media evaluations, but often the negative ones are just they hate you and they're super mean, right? It's not oh, this is what I think you can improve, but actually no, you shouldn't be teaching. So that was really, really difficult because I think it made me feel, I mean, it wasn't that mean. It was just she's a little disorganized. But that's what it feels like someone's telling me that I shouldn't be teaching. And that's the point. It's you're already up there feeling maybe really insecure about your position as authority and what you actually have to offer. And to get any kind of negative feedback just feels, I think, really personal and really bad. But then on the flip side, I've also just had incredible moments with students. And we were talking about this one recently. I was in office hours and we were talking about a poem and it was about grief, and she brought up that she's been thinking about that a lot lately because her boyfriend just broke up with her. And I had this moment how do I navigate this? I need to be professional. I also really want to show empathy. And so I'm saying things that I would normally say. I was no, I think poetry is a great way to work through it. And let's talk about it maybe at the end, And then we just spent an hour talking about this poem because Max had assigned it. We were teaching together. So I was I also don't know this poem that well. Let's figure it out together. And that was really beautiful. So I think the relationships with the students are also really important to the experience here.
There's no greater gift that you can give us than coming to office hours and asking questions about things. I personally love that. Because there's nothing that makes me feel oh, students really don't care than just sitting in office hours week after week and then oh God, what am I doing wrong?
Was it scary? I didn't go to office hours and then
no, I get it.
I had
so
to
I'm telling you.
when they forced me to go to.
No, I hear that. Yeah. So I'm telling you, for me specifically.
No, that's true. I need to brainwash myself with that still because I always have this thing about bothering people. So that's That's a handy tool as a grad student to get over that. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, and then Hannah.
Thank you all so much. You guys are like a fun friend group that I want to join. Or like a new version of friends, but like corporate. I wanted to ask you how you have discovered what you like. Whether that's like your academic interests or just how you've been following your nose, like to graduate school, discovering this path, and then your specific fields as you're preparing for your exams and dissertations. Because I find the world is so big, and I still feel like I have so many interests, but choosing something you want to dedicate a lot of time to is a hard decision to make.
And Complet is very much the major for indecisive people, so I put off that class as long as possible. And I still I'm taking quals next year, and for English you have to sort of have a century, and I can't even narrow it down to a century. I'm like, what if I like all the centuries?
There's so many centuries.
There's so many.
So many centuries, so little time.
Exactly. So I get that struggle. I think that there is I don't know if this is a little bit of a cop out of an answer, but I think all research is to a lesser or greater extent research. Of what resonates with you, with your, not just like your brain, but also with your heart, and like what it could be like your own experiences, or like whatever it is, like a book that you really loved when you were younger that stayed with you, and then you're like, okay, what's this book doing? So for me, I like my primary thing is translation studies, like theory and practice, and I think it came from the fact that like as a kid, I was for a while the only native speaker in my family because we're first-gen immigrants, and so like having to navigate this world in which I'm like translating between one, like from one language to another, just like very sort of like basic settings, and how embarrassed I would used to get, and like how difficult it was, even though like I knew Russian, I knew English, but like bridging that gap always felt impossible or felt like so difficult. And so I think, but like retroactively, I can draw that line very neatly, right? But like how I actually got there is I thought like, I don't remember when it occurred to me that I think I heard the word translation studies or the phrase translation studies somewhere at some point. I was like, that sounds cool, and then forgot about it for a few years. And then I was sort of flailing along and write an article at some point for one class. I don't even remember when. Like, I don't remember. It's very hard for me to say like when these points actually happened. But at a certain point, it was sort of a practical consideration of like, what I've read, I enjoy, and I know that I need to have a topic to apply to grad school with. And grad school is a place where you're like supposed to be able to explore this stuff, and you can also change things. So that's what I applied with. And a lot of people apply with one thing and then end up doing something else. But it's just so happened that I applied with it, and then the more I learned about it, the more I liked it. And that's kind of how I've stumbled my way into what I do. And then there are a bunch of like peripheral interests that have like I've ended up teaching a bunch of classes that were based on cities, just completely randomly. And then now I get to say like urban humanities is one of my specialties. Like no idea how that happened. And, like wrote my undergrad thesis on a novel that ended up reading like a bunch of narrative theories. Now narrative theory is one of my specialties. No idea how any of these things happened. So basically big shrug.
I guess I'm kind of a predictable person. So, in the sense that I've been doing Latin since 7th grade when I started to learn that, bizarrely offered at my school. And so I did that for 11 years. And I was like, I'll probably keep doing Latin. I really like this, and then I was like, maybe I'll do some ancient Greek. That's cool too. And so those sorts of things, like I've always been like, well, I'll always be doing something with that. I always have that on the burner. And I guess something about juggling lots of jobs and different responsibilities also is figuring out how to do that with your hobbies, your interests as well, and making sure you both a balance. Like I realized a month or so ago, I hadn't written a poem in like 2.5, 3 years, and I call myself a poet. So I was like, well, that's gotta change. So that's been something I've been trying to reprioritize recently in terms of carving out time, because time is so precious for all of us. And I was just realizing like if I don't put it on my schedule or on my calendar, like it's just not going to happen. So just poem time is there, and I don't know what's going to happen in that time, but it's there every week. So yeah, just blocking out time for things you love and not needing to necessarily justify that is super important. And also just doing silly things and not having necessarily like utilitarian endpoints of this will be useful for this. Maybe just because I'm not good at thinking that way. But it's really great to just always be experimenting and sampling different things. And then who knows, all of a sudden you're really into like roller derby, which happened to me in Montana, you know? So just to say,
Bravo.
well, no.
Oh, okay. Well,
No,
well,
but-
no, it's different from no.
Almost my own.
Oh, wow.
But yeah. So yeah, that's just in terms of experimentation, but also reward yourself or like nourish yourself with the things you already love.
Yeah, I've really been resisting that question in myself because what was your name?
Kirsten.
Kirsten?
Kirsten.
Kirsten. As Kirsten mentioned, you know, people sit up here, they're in the room, and each one has their expertise, a specific thing that they focus on, and that's what the PhD guides you toward. Like you become an expert in something, and I find that infinitely boring. The idea of being an expert and being like, I'm going to go to the same conferences, apply to the same journals, talk to the same people, be part of the same conversations constantly. Like I want to do different things. I don't want to be an expert. I want to contribute to a conversation, and then if you tell me I'm so wrong, good for you. That's fine. Like I don't need to be the authority on this. So I'm also really struggling actually with that same question. Is like, how do I figure out that one thing that I'm interested in when there's so many other things that I would rather be doing? So I think a lot of what's guided me has just been support structures. So I ended up in Russian as an undergrad because I took one class and they were like, here's a job. Like they gave me a job, the director gave me a job, and then they were like, we're going to fund you to go to Russia for a summer. We're going to fund you to go to Kazakhstan for a year. We're going to fund you private tutoring for 4 years, which is just a program that exists that was just there, right? And being at a large public research university, it was really hard to find small units that felt like they were community oriented. So I stuck with it. And then same thing here, I ended up being a part of the Berkeley Center for New Media because it felt like a smaller niche group that also made me feel like I wasn't competing with my peers because it's not something that a lot of literature students do. So it was me fighting against wanting to feel like I'm in competition to do something that feels different. So yeah, I don't know, just trying to abate a lot of my own insecurities and find support has been kind of my path, but I am still struggling with picking one thing, one niche, one research interest.
So we have Hannah, and then I think we have a question from you too. So
my question.
Oh.
Anyways.
Hannah, no.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. I also was a community college transfer student, and I go to UCLA now, so it's nice to see you guys up there. I guess I had a very similar question, but I know that Berkeley specifically has a DE. I was wondering how you guys picked yours, and also if that's like common in most PhDs.
I'm not in a DE. You don't have to be. I if there were a translation studies DE, I would be all over that. There's not, so I don't have one, and that's not a requirement. It I think makes you a stronger candidate on the job market, but yeah, it's not a requirement.
I am in one, the New Media DE. I think the founder said that they have like a 100% placement rate. And I was like, wow, I'm about to ruin that. That is some pressure. Yeah. But I fell into it because I took a class that was a requirement for me, and it happened to be kind of dually listed or like. So then I just kept taking it, and it's some of my favorite experiences. I got to make paper mache art. So that would be my alternative life. I would be a paper mache artist. And there are not a lot of classes that you get to do creative things for. So that's been really, really great. Like I've made like different video art. But yeah, there's a lot. I don't know if a lot of other PhD programs have that. I think they do minors. Like I know Columbia does minors. They're usually like pretty related to what you're doing, like a tech minor if you do Slavic or things like that. There's also I think a Renaissance DE here, and you get a second PhD. It's like so intense, you have to get a second PhD. Is that correct? You know.
I can just say 2 words about the field, about the DEs. The DEs at Berkeley can develop out of faculty collaborations in certain fields, and then they started to develop a graduate student component. The most popular ones are maybe critical theory, there's medieval, there's Renaissance, they're structurally sometimes a little bit different, and that's where it's a concurrent PhD or something like that. But the idea is essentially that you have a main field, you write your PhD complete with a designated emphasis in critical theory. That means you have a couple of courses you have to take in that. I think it's cool at the end here. It's not my job, but you can ask me after. It's cool because it also creates another community at the same time. Yeah. So and often that works very well. Graduate student community in the department, in your specialization, Slavic or whatever it might be, and then critical theory obviously adds a bunch of other people, anthropology, etc. from across campus. I think Berkeley. I really like that about Berkeley.
Very quick question. How many students are in the department, graduate students in the complex department?
40?
I actually should know.
Like,
It fluctuates. The numbers are, to be very honest, the numbers all over the country are slightly diminishing in humanities PhD programs.
It's about 50.
50.
About
This is why we're not in math.
Well, no, but because like after your 5th or 6th year, you sort of like everyone goes off and does their own thing, and at a certain point, like we don't know if somebody's defended or not. They could be off living in like in Madrid
And
or
some people
whatever.
you just don't see. Someone was like, "Oh, so and so's in your truck," and I was like, "No, I've
It's
never
a big,
seen
Yeah.
It's a big group.
her." Yeah, I can copy it.
Yeah, so that's kind of a follow-up question from the one Pearlie mentioned. So you guys all teach, right? What was the most frustrating experience when you're teaching, like when you're interacting with students? Because I'm the kind of person that goes after my instructors all the time. I'm like, can you explain this? And like, what is the most like the experience that kind of makes you don't want to do it again the most?
I love teaching. It's like my favorite part of grad school.
Awesome.
So I should start there, and any complaints that I have are secondary to the fact that it's the best thing I do. We had a funny experience.
Yeah, we did.
We were teaching a class on magical realism, and we started off the first day by reading a James Tate poem, who's like not quite like a magical realist in the most traditional sense, but his poems are kind of like neurotic and like darkly funny in a way a lot of magical realist texts are. And we had a student, second day of college, came up to us after class and was like, "Actually, that wasn't magical realism, and I know because I'm writing a novel."
The gall.
So, and I think the takeaway there is just like honestly, there's very occasional moments where there's a lack of respect. Other than that, there's really nothing.
Yeah, really, I was just going to complain about, remote instruction and Zoom and the pit, but it's not any individual student's fault, but it's just been something that's been really hard, as lots of people have said, in terms of figuring out how to adapt in-person classroom techniques and methods in that online format. And so that's been something that's been really frustrating for me, because I feel like it's been hard to get that feeling of energy in a room when there's no room. So for me it would be that. But certainly, I certainly have a catalog in my mind of all those sorts of interactions for sure.
I started teaching online, and then I went to in person, and that was also weirdly like more of a transition than I thought it would be, because I think that empty space is assumed on Zoom, but when it's in person, it feels more awkward, and so I feel like I'm doing a worse job, and so it's taken me a while to transition like that.
Grading.
Oh yeah.
I hate grading. It's because like I was trained to so before I started teaching, I was a reader for someone else, and he writes so many comments. So I was commenting on everything, and then he would comment on my comments, and I was like, okay, I need to do a really good job. And now I spend way more than I should commenting on essays. And I'm like, I know that this is the most useful thing that I could give my students to like actually really engage with what they're saying, but it's also incredibly draining because, when you're writing an essay, you have to think through one idea. I'm thinking through 40 different ideas and how to make them work. And that's just, it's hard and it's great. And I still think about some of the essays that I've gotten. They've been some of the funniest things. They're just such charming, wonderful writers. But it's really hard. It's really draining.
Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, then I think that's all for today. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your time, for your honesty, for sharing everything that you did. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to start with our fully virtual Twitch panel. So whoever wants to attend that, feel free. Otherwise, you have an hour's break until 1:30.
So just a few thoughts or a few comments on the clutch